What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the framework. We have another special edition of the Lion and the Physique. What is going on, Todd?
Not much. How you doing, Ryan?
I'm good, man. I'm good. So you are just about 4 weeks, right?
2.5 weeks.
Chipping away, man. How you
Yep.
feeling?
I've had better days.
You know what? I feel like you and I have always discussed like why we do the local shows and stuff, and I know we've brought it up 100 times in other episodes. Like, there's a show in a couple weeks in Connecticut.
Mhm.
Well, obviously your show in what is it? Is it Burlington?
Bloomfield.
All right, so there's the show in Bloomfield. Then there's like 2 weeks later, it's Connecticut. Like, for the tri-state area, there's a lot of shows in the next 18 weeks.
Hmm.
And I think one thing that I kind of do to myself, and I know you've done the same, is like, hey, could I get ready in X amount of weeks? Could I stay ready after X amount of weeks? And then I think that kind of falls into the kind of question of like, where should I be competing, right? Like, what division am I competing in to give myself the best opportunity? Listen, first and foremost, we want to be better than the last time we were on stage, right? And
100%.
secondly, it's like, hey, I really want to get on stage because I missed the stage, but am I really going to be ready in 5 weeks? Maybe I'm not going to be ready for men's physique. Will I be ready for classic? Will I be a little fuller for bodybuilding? Like, that's something that goes on in my head, a million times over. Do you ever find yourself like trying to pick a show and saying to yourself like, hey, like in this instance, like you've toyed with the idea of moving to classic, which is awesome, dude. Have you ever said like, you know what, maybe classic, as much as I want classic, maybe it's just not right for me right now, or maybe it has to be classic right now. You've always had wide lats, a tiny waist. Have you ever played with the idea of like, hey, maybe if I want to compete and I want to compete now, it's going to be men's physique? Like, how do you determine based on your off-season goals and where you are in prep to like, hey, before you register, you can really do whatever the hell you want. So how are you determining personally? Let's just say, just like, how do I feel? Like, where do I want to compete? What division do I want to compete in? So how does Todd determine before anything? Like, man, I want to be a bodybuilder. I want to be a classic physique competitor. I want to be a men's physique guy.
Well, that's where we talked about this before. Where hiring a coach can help out, especially an experienced coach. Like our former coach that we met with was Pat, and Pat's been on the NPC scene forever, and he's competed and won and everything, so he knows what to look for. And also talking to other bodybuilders too that have competed in other organizations and have done so for many years can also kind of help give you a big scope on like where you should be at. Um, Pat's biggest thing for anybody that's going to do classic and as well as bodybuilding was you got to have legs. If you don't have any legs, then there's no point in even trying it because it's going to be one of the criteria they grade you on. Whereas if you do have, like you mentioned, a tiny waist and good lats and a good core, you can have no problem doing physique competitions as well, especially if you don't have the legs to match up with other competitors. When it comes to an actual show, the first one, I would say you got to have a coach to help guide you along and kind of figure out, okay, which one we're going to do. Have a couple planned out and be like, okay, you're not ready for this one, but let's do this one a couple weeks later. Your body should be ready by then. But once you've been through like a few shows, as you know, you pretty much have an idea what you have to get to be stage ready for your category, whether it's classic physique or whether it's bodybuilding. What about your thought process on all that as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to gauge your not saying that the leg thing is wrong. The leg thing is 100%, but another variable I think you have to look at is your ability to get conditioned. How long and what's the process that it's going to take for you to lean down, right? I mean, obviously, shows change all the time, right? You may be 8 weeks out, maybe you need 12, so you push it to the next show or you push it to 16. Your ability to get conditioned, right? I'm somebody who my legs don't start popping until like 3 or 4 weeks out. So I'm in
Oh,
my own head, like, man, everything looks right on the money. And then until I'm like almost there, like, oh, now the lines go all the way up to my hips. Now I'm seeing some striations where my hamstring ties into my glutes. So your ability to get conditioned and where you're most conditioned will also play a role. somebody may, to your point, not have the biggest blown out quads. But if you're showing a six pack and obliques and your lats are there and you have massive caps, like, and you're 8, 9 weeks out, and jump into a men's physique competition. If you're somebody who's just like, man, I cannot get there no matter how long it takes, that's obviously where a coach is going to play a huge role. But I think that that's almost more of a bodybuilding criteria. That just means like, hey, you're big all around. You're going to need a little more time to pull it in. And more likely than not, everything's going to pop at the same time. So you're more likely than not more on the bigger side. So maybe lean towards bodybuilding. You don't know where you'll get if you give yourself 12, 14, 18, 20 weeks. But to say before anything, like, I'm going to be a classic physique guy, man, you don't really know. Like, you don't know where your body's going to land. A great example, and I talked to you about this about a month ago, was, man, I'm like 6 weeks into this prep and I don't see my legs. Like, I don't know, man. Like, maybe I got to swallow my pride and maybe I got to throw board shorts on again, you know, and do, because everything's popping everywhere else. And you're like, dude, trust the process, man. Like, keep grinding up that car, like keep grinding, keep hitting your cardio and see what happens. I woke up this morning and did my poses, and you know, I share some posing, you know, photos and stuff with you from time to time. And like, bro, I have lines in my quads at 10 weeks out I've never had before. So nice. I'm like, oh shit. So that kind of gives me that, all right, I'm a little on the fuller side still, which I've always had issues with, and I've explained in other videos, like I stay pretty full till the end. But now I see lines in my quads. I'm controlling my hamstrings and my mandatories. I'm like, maybe bodybuilding isn't out of the question. I know I bury you with this all the time with like going back and forth in classic and open, but listen, the conditioning's there like I haven't seen before. And you know for yourself, the conditioning right now at 3 weeks, at 5 weeks, at 6 weeks was where you've never been before. And that gives us the ability as athletes to say like, hey, maybe the division that I thought I should be in will be fun, but maybe it's not what's best for me. And you have to make those changes based on not one individual muscle group, but your ability to get there, if that makes sense.
It makes 100% sense. Yeah, I think the biggest difference, like I was looking up the criteria for classic physique versus bodybuilding, other than the size matters a lot in bodybuilding, but you have to be that much more conditioned to where you can see more of the muscle separation versus the classic physique, as well as like the graininess of the tissue, as well as like a little bit more vascularity than what you would see in a classic physique thing. So for someone like me, it's very easy for me to get to that conditioning. So that's why, you know, in the past, I've generally preferred to go bodybuilding, because my body allows me to get to those levels where I can get really shredded. You can see everything, versus classic physique, which is a little bit harder for me to maintain the size, but not as be as defined, which might not hit their criteria depending on the judging for that day.
Yeah, I think I would have to agree. I mean, when you have that graininess, that leanness, I mean, first and foremost, and we've spoke on this before, is like OCB is conditioning first, right? You go to an NPC show or, you know, something non-tested, a lot of times the size and structure will play just as big of a role. I've competed in NPC shows in the past. More specifically, I did the Golds Classic in 2016. And I got on stage like 154 pounds. I thought I was shredded out. I mean, my posing could have been better, you know, so on. There's 100 different things. But, you know, I lost to somebody who had no upper body conditioning, but their legs were just blown out. Like the guy just stood next to me and his legs were more dominant. So size is a little bit more of a factor there. Whereas OCB is like, hey, whoever has the most lines, then whoever's hard and grainy and the muscle is separated, to your point. And then, you know, whoever has a little bit of that round, whoever has a little bit of that fullness, right? So, you know, to checking those boxes is like, how conditioned are you at how long between now and the show of your choice, between like determining your division? And I think you hit the nail on the head, man, is like the criteria is something that like you need to like study, because where you think you are at 12 weeks, it's not going to be where you are at 3 or 4 weeks. It's not going to be where you are at peak week. The moment you register for that show, and you made a great joke last week, where you were like, hey, once you pay them, they'll let you get on stage regardless of what you look. And that's kind of resonated with me, where it's like, man, I want to get on stage in 5 weeks in Connecticut. I love the promoter. I love the show that they put on. The lighting is right. Everything is perfect for that show. But am I really going to be ready in the division that I should be competing in 5 weeks? Got to
Mm,
swallow your pride sometimes and say, probably not.
right.
Um, could I dial it down even more and jump into bodybuilding in 5 weeks? Maybe. Am I going to place as well? Probably not. Am I going to be as conditioned as I could be if I gave myself 10, 14 weeks? Probably not. So it's really, I think it's tough, man. I think it's very hard. I would consider us to some degree kind of seasoned veterans when it comes to competing. We've done it so many times. I don't really think there's any stage jitters for us at this point in our careers.
Mhm.
I think we just love getting on stage, and it's really just like, man, as much as you want to be there, don't embarrass yourself. Make sure that you're up there and you're standing next to the guys that you should be standing next to. And I used this analogy in the past, and I know you agree.
Mm,
We're not there for the trophy, but it doesn't hurt to show up and have somebody be like, man, I could have placed third if that guy wasn't there.
mm,
You know, man,
uh,
I ended up at seventh, but if Todd didn't step on that stage next to me, I could have been fifth. I could
mm,
have been, that guy really changed how the judges were looking at everybody. And you just want that feeling of like, man, I belong up here. I don't think either of us at this point are like, we're men's physique guys. We can get on stage and we could really disrupt some days. I don't think we're doing that anymore. I think we're a little too hard for those divisions. Those guys at the OCB level, their starting weights around 170, 175. I mean, we're upwards to 200 pounds. So I think we really teeter between that classic and that bodybuilding, those divisions. And then really, like you said, determining like, where is your separation? Where is your conditioning? Like, how hard are you right now? What's your diet like? What's your training like? There's so many variables, right?
right. And with bodybuilding, a lot of people they don't understand how lean you actually have to be there. So when they get there, they're like, oh, if I eat this food or that food, I'm going to spill over. If you're at the point where like a little piece of food could cause you to spill over, well, then guess what? You're not lean enough for it. I see that mistake made a lot where people are just like, oh, I'm lean. There's a difference between being lean and like stage shredded lean, and it's completely different worlds. And a lot of people don't understand that. And I see them get up on stage and then spill over. Like I had competed at NPC shows as well. And that was one thing you mentioned before that I'd agree with, was that I was, not placing as well as I would like to have against people that were standing next to me that were a lot larger than me. But yet they couldn't hold their posing. They're sweating all over the place. But again, different criteria for different organizations. So each one's very different in what they want to see with their champions or the people that they place highly from the judging staff. So yeah, it's an interesting game that you kind of do need people like you or me or other people who have done this before to kind of pick their brains on, especially if it's your first show, to be like, where am I at or where should I be going with this? And there's a lot of factors that play into it, which organization and where realistically you should be at, which category and everything. But yeah, it's a delicate ball game to play, but you really you push through in a lot of cases to kind of see where you're at the end of the day to pick the right category for yourself. And it's sometimes it's frustrating. Sometimes you think, and I've been at shows, I'm sure you've been too as well, where we go to a show. I remember one show I went with well, she was my girlfriend at the time and now my wife, and we're watching, and the criteria for the female bikini competitors, and we're looking up there, and there was one person who was like in really great shape, and she didn't look like she fit the category as well. She was by far like more muscular than the rest of them. I'm like, I said, watch, she's not going to place as high as the rest of them are going to place. Sure enough, she didn't, because she didn't fit the criteria for the scoring and everything. And she's like, well, why didn't she place on? I'm like, she was in the wrong category. She should have been in category up above in bikini. She shouldn't have been in a bikini at all in the first place. So I'm
Yeah,
sure
I
you see.
think I mean that's exactly what we're talking about, right? Is you may think that you know where you want to be, right? And maybe we'll stick with the bikini and to physique and stuff like that, because women have more divisions now at this point where it's almost like you're splitting hairs with where you want to be, right?
Right.
Um, you see, I would say the largest category now for women has to be wellness, right? It's the ability to not have to train your upper body as much, but you like having glutes, you like having muscular detailed legs, but some of these girls maybe don't have the glutes that you
Mm,
should have for wellness. and they're placing in that, 5 to 8 range. And they're like, I just don't get it. Like, I don't have that much upper body muscle. I feel like my legs are down. I'm like, yeah, but realistically, you could have dieted for another 4 or 5 weeks and you could have fit into the bikini category. Maybe your legs aren't as big as you think they are, or as detailed or conditioned as they are. And you need to be able to swallow your pride sometimes and say, like, okay, well, maybe because for where I am right now, condition wise, I do take bikini. I place 2 to 5. Maybe I take, 1 to 3, the top three. And then I grow in the off season and I focus on those glutes and I hire a coach. A great example with the men, I'll pick on the guys for a little bit now, is, men's physique guy who wants to be classic. Man, I get that you love the posing. I get that you love training. You're training your legs and stuff, but you're just not there. If your legs have no detail, which you've seen before, and you're wondering why you're placing 8 out of 10, 10 out of 12, yeah, you're conditioned and you're lean, but your legs are non-existent.
Mm.
Then you have guys in bodybuilding who they're 6'1", 6'2", they're 240 pounds in the off season. You're competing at maybe 205, 210. But you're like, man, you could be an IFBB pro if you just move down to classic.
Mm.
So it's really just trying to determine, like, man, what is the best division for me based on my size and structure? Because that's what the judges are looking at. Like, how frustrating is it to try to explain to somebody, like, hey, you want to be a bodybuilder, but you're a classic guy. You want to be a classic guy, but you're men's physique. You want to be women's bodybuilding, but you're probably wellness. And it's like, well, I think I can get there. I think I'll place well. It's not really up to us, right? It's up to the judges. So how would you kind of guide, somebody? What are some things that Todd would look for if somebody comes up and says, hey, I'm not sure if I'm a bodybuilder, a classic physique guy, or men's physique guy? Break down those categories for us.
So obviously for bodybuilding, is you're going to look at, do they have upper body and lower body? Same thing with classic physique. Do you have a big upper body? You have a big lower body? If yes to both of those, then okay, then we'll have to break it down from there. If you say no, like I don't have the legs for it, then that's an obvious one. You're going right to physique. Then if that's what you absolutely want to do and get on the stage, is do physique. From there, we're going to look to see how big your muscle frame is and everything. How much muscle can you pack onto your frame? How lean can you get? How do you do in posing? Sometimes you get people with great bodies, and you get them up there on stage and they can't do all the poses. Like one of the biggest ones is the front lat spread and the rear lat spread. Like they don't have the mobility in their shoulders to move their elbows and everything else to get in that position. And even if they tried their best, it's going to look awkward and they just won't be able to hit those poses for whatever reason with their mobility and flexibility. And then to go from there, we would just kind of start to cut down on everything, just kind of see, okay, what are you looking more like? And then kind of look at how shows are. Like that's why I tell people, and I'm sure you tell people too, go to a show, go see what shows are like, see who's winning these shows, look at shows that are coming up at the one you want to do and see what past winners look like to see if you belong in that category at all, and kind of base your body off of that. Look at your photos and also get objective critiques from people who've done this before. Like, where should I be at? Heck, you can even write to judges at some of these shows or promoters and be like, hey, where do you think I should place best with? Or, can I pick your brain? Like I'll, Venmo you or PayPal, I just need an hour of your time just to kind of see where you think I should be at, since most of the promoters are people who've done many shows over, and go from there. What do you think about that?
Yeah, you're spot on. You made a point about, looking at past winners, which is something that I'm guilty of even now, considering myself like I said before, a seasoned veteran, right? I've competed X amount of times. I feel like, but the judging criteria is going to be different because with these shows, you're oftentimes you're seeing different promoters, different judging, so on and so forth. So I go on and I look at past winners and I look at the photos, and not that I compare themselves to where I am now, but I'm like, okay, this is what the judges have looked for in 2023, 2022, sometimes 2021 for the bodybuilders. This is what they've looked like for classic, and, classic more than anything changes almost show to show. Bodybuilding, to your point, usually stays the same.
Mm-hmm.
I think the one issue that I would have with OCB in general would be their inability to have classes, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what I mean by that is you're 154 pounds on stage,
mm-hmm.
but you're 5'8". Why are you standing next to a guy who's 5'8", 205?
Mm,
Why are you standing next to a guy who's 6 foot, 158 pounds? Like, I mean, I've competed now in several shows. The last two shows of Classic, there was like two classes at most. And I
mm.
get like you have to break it up eventually when you just get too many athletes, but I mean, universally, height and weight. Why are we not checking those boxes? I mean, if you, Todd, are 5'9", 5'8",
5'9", 5'10". Yeah.
and what's your average show weight?
We'll say 163.
Okay. Okay. How about we say 160 to 163?
Mhm.
So if you were 5'8", 160 to 163 pounds, maybe you broaden that or something like that. Because when we register, we put in our height and weight. So
Mhm.
I just feel like, man, you may check all the boxes that Todd and I have discussed up until this point. And the biggest thing of all of it is you cannot determine who's going to show up on show day. So
Exactly.
utilize all the variables that we've talked about. How you gauge your off season. Do you have a coach? How is your conditioning? How long is it going to take you to get there? But ultimately, like looking at past winners and seeing what the judging criteria is. But at the end of the day, you just need to show up at your best because you never know, A, how these shows are going to be run, what division, if any, you're going to fall into, or maybe category or class, whatever you want to call it. And you just don't know. I mean, look, we've been in situations where past pros have been able to recompete in amateur shows, and it's like, well, okay, that guy looks like a freak. He looks great. That
Mhm.
guy's going to kill it on the stage. And I will say one of the best parts about OCB is always the camaraderie backstage and people sharing these stories. And I think universally, we could all agree that you have to be conditioned. You have to sometimes swallow your pride and know what works best for you. And ultimately, you just never know how these shows are going to be run.
100%.
All right, man. Listen, this was a great episode. As always, I appreciate you jumping on. Everybody, head to vmisports.com. Use code Ryan10 to get yourself a discount on some VMI products. Todd, thanks, man, as always. And thank you all for stopping by the framework.
Thanks, Ryan.